Mayor Dyer, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Steve.
Yes, we're really here today to talk about resilience of a different kind. You went through, experienced firsthand one of the most abhorrent attacks in American history. You called it the darkest day in Orlando history. I think it was a dark day for the nation, June 12th. Just play it out for us. 2 a.m., what happened?
So I got called just before 3 o'clock. I got the call that no mayor ever wants to receive. It was one of our deputy chiefs, and he said, well, I was home in bed with my wife, and he said, Mayor, this is Deputy Chief Bobby Enzueto. I hate to inform you, but there's an active shooter at the Pulse nightclub. There are multiple casualties, and it's a hostage situation. We're setting the mobile command center up on Orange Avenue at a certain location.
Did you know the club?
I did know the club. I think I've been there once, maybe at the opening. First thing I did, my police liaison officer was on the way to pick me up, but I was a dad first and the mayor second, so I called my 26-year-old son, and I'm not sure that he's ever been to the club, but you want to make sure. So fortunately, he had his phone charged up, and he answered it, and he was home in bed, so I could go do what I needed to do at that point.
What began to fold from then? I mean, you're mayor of a city, you're under siege, all sorts of challenges today with concerns about terrorism, but I know that you had recently had a simulation of problems in your city. So how did leadership evolve?
We do a lot of emergency preparedness training. Of course, a lot of it's related to hurricanes, because where you could have a hurricane any given year, but we had an employment-related shooting about 8 years ago, and since 9/11, we've been doing active shooter training quite a bit. And with things happening in Baltimore and Ferguson, we also did a civil disobedience exercise. So we do them full scale, and we do a lot of tabletop. So fortunately, we had figured out the best and most effective ways to communicate, and that's what my role was during the course of the Pulse tragedy.
So how did you know that the Buddy Dyer role in, I mean, this is a horrific incident, and I remember that night myself getting a call from MSNBC because they instantly began to think about ISIS, homegrown terrorism, and we need commentators. But how did you define your role as mayor in the middle of this?
Well, I went on the way to the command center and picked up my deputy chief of staff, Heather Fagan, who is really in charge of our whole communications operation. And we talked about on the way to the command center, we've never done anything like that, so what's my role? And I thought, well, number one, I don't want to get in the way of the law enforcement professionals. I want to make sure that I support, not undermine, the chief's chain of command and authority over the situation. And then thirdly, gather as much information as I can during the night so that at the opportune time, I can communicate to the public and reassure the public. And we didn't know the whole scope of everything at the time we were going to the command center. I got there, the chief, two or three deputy chiefs are there, 3 sheriffs, the FBI, the FDLE, and they were working so professionally and in concert, and they brought me up to speed on what had occurred to that point.
What was the human side of this? I mean, I can't even imagine when you know that, I heard originally when they had known that 20 people had died, and of course those numbers went up, but I mean, these are real human beings, people moving to hospitals. I mean, how did you feel as a human being and a leader in all of this?
You know, at that point, it's horrendous, but you're trying to do your job. You're trying to set aside your emotions, and if you're one of the people that has to lead and communicate, you absolutely have to set aside your emotions, because it could be totally overwhelming if you didn't do that. And when I got there, we kind of started understanding what the scope of everything was. Some of the officers that had been on the scene at the very beginning knew that the number of dead were above 25 to 30. So it was an unimaginable event as it unfolded.
And as you knew those numbers were higher and higher, I was impressed that very early on you began to sort of shift to some of the attention to, okay, now what do we do very quickly? What do we do to bring other stakeholders in the community together?
Well,
walk us through that.
So we killed the terrorist about 5:15. and there was discussion. He had discussion about explosives. So we didn't know if there were explosives in the club, in his car. So we waited a little while to make sure that the building was cleared and his car was cleared before we had the first press conference. But we had quite a discussion about what type of tone we wanted to set. And we wanted to convey concise, accurate information. We wanted to calm the public down. We wanted them to know that they were safe and that we had this under control. And at the point we came out about 7:30, we knew that he was a lone gunman and there wasn't another actor. So we were able to convey that. And I think the message from the very beginning was, we're not going to be defined by the hateful act of a demented killer. We're going to be defined by a response. And that response has to be with love and compassion and unity, and the community embraced that whole notion from the very beginning.
Were you prepared to do that in advance? Because you didn't know that he was a lone gunman at that time. There was, all sorts of rampant speculation that this was a Bataclan-like hit, as we saw unfold in Paris and others. But did you come prepackaged that you knew that you had a role in leading the community to that conclusion?
I wish I could tell you that I came prepackaged with that, but a lot of it was done on the fly, but with a lot of thought given to what is the messaging that needs to come out. In terms of our communication, that's a little bit different in terms of how we did everything else to get out to the public with Twitter and having one solid message. And that we did have prepared and prepackaged through all the training exercises that we had done.
You've been an Orlando mayor for nearly 14 years. You're on the verge, a month away from your 14th year, the longest serving mayor in Orlando. What didn't you know? What didn't you prepare for that you now, in retrospect, wish you had? You did a lot of stuff on simulations, but is there anything that you thought didn't go right that you want to share as a lesson to others thinking about this?
You know what? So many things did go right in terms of the response from the first responders to the medical personnel that basically operated a MASH unit at the hospital, to the community doing whatever they could do. Setting up the Victims Assistance Center was a very difficult thing, and we made a mistake at the beginning in not doing it at a secure area so that the press had availability to the victims and their families as they were coming and going. We moved it a couple days later over to Camping World Stadium so that we were able to bring the victims and their families to get their services in a more secure manner. And that's probably the only thing that I can think of right off the bat.
Who were the heroes of the day?
Every person that had a role overperformed. We had employees that never thought they'd have roles like running a victims assistance center, but the first responders were heroes, the doctors were heroes, the community as a whole, how they rallied around everybody. And I will single one person out, and that's the medical examiner. So at the end of the first day, we were able to remove all the victims by about 7 o'clock that night. And I had implored him that we needed to have the victims identified, because if we went several days without being able to tell the families who had died, who was injured, it was not going to be a good situation. It would make things spiral for sure. And he had everybody identified by 7 o'clock the next morning.
Now, this was a gay nightclub. It was a gay nightclub. Well, LGBT community supported it strongly. How did that, if at all, figure into the way the different component parts in response to this happened?
Well, everybody knows Orlando worldwide, but the first thing they think is Disney, and the second is Universal. If anybody from Universal is here, I meant to say Universal first and Disney second. But we're much more than just the theme parks, and we're a community that embraces diversity and equality. So we're a community that is very friendly to the LGBT community, and that's what we're all about.
I just read, in fact, today, just to give you a bit of praise, I'm not normally in that business, but you got a perfect score on LGBT inclusiveness in the Municipality Equality Index. Is that a key thing for you? Is that important?
Embracing diversity, it's not only the right thing to do, it's the morally right thing to do, but it's part of our economic development platform. I kind of follow Richard Florida's teachings that you have to have a city that embraces diversity so you can attract the young millennials that are the entrepreneurs that are going to make your city successful in the future, and that's the type of city they want to live in.
Now, when you think about this question of responding, I'm interested, we've got a lot of mayors and people who run cities here and creative people. What do you think are some of the most important things they can do? Because, Orlando is a very big city, and those of us who report on terrorism used to say, in the old days, Al-Qaeda would only strike trophy targets. But now after San Bernardino, what has just happened here. And it's not all Islamic. You have other kinds of horrific things that happen. What do you think you as Buddy Dyer most feel you somehow drilled down into that you want to convey to other urban practitioners to put time into?
My messages to all mayors it's about soft targets now, the places that aren't hardened, so bars,
Right.
restaurants, shopping malls, and it could happen in any city, in any state, anywhere, so you have to be prepared for that, and knowing how to communicate is an important factor, but having the tools and technology and training for your first responders and those others who will be responding to that type of incident. And I'll give you an example. We bought a Bearcat about 4 years ago, and a Bearcat is a armored battering ram, basically, and we used it to breach the Pulse wall. And if we had not had that, we would not have been able to have the end result that we had. And I caught a lot of flack because it was when the public or maybe the
Was
ed
this
board
surplus stuff that you were buying from the military? I mean, because
it was not surplus.
It was not.
It was a new piece of equipment.
So what made you think you would need a Bearcat?
We wanted to be prepared for what we needed to be prepared for, and we operate very regionally. So we bought that. Some of the other communities have other pieces of equipment, but there was a lot of opposition to the militarization of police departments. So I was very happy that we had that Bearcat that night.
When I guess one of the things we were talking about, you and I were talking last night that I found intriguing was that you brought in grief counseling not only for yourself, but for your team, and you were feeling a bit guilty during some of this.
So I went through debriefings with the police on Tuesday, the firefighters on Wednesday, Pulse was on Sunday, but my whole team was operating either the victim's assistants or they had been on site. So we brought in grief counseling the next week for what we call everybody on the third floor. And I'd had a personal friend of mine who's a counselor call me just to check on me to see how I was doing. And I told her, I'm not really feeling the emotion that I think I should. I haven't cried, I haven't broken down or anything, and it's not really hit me in terms of this loss of life. And she said, well, you can't. You have to be strong. You have to stay in your lane and be strong for the community, because if you break down, then that breaks down the entire community. And I told that story at our staff first debriefing or counseling, and 4 hands immediately went up and said, Mayor, thank you for sharing that, because I feel the exact same way. I've been doing my job, and I haven't had time to grieve or feel sad about this situation.
One of the things that was awkward for me in preparing for this conversation is, in a way, I wanted to talk to you about everything else you do. I want to talk about how do you build a healthy city, get stakeholders, deal with potholes, dog parks and other kinds of things. When something like this happens that's so defining, and it's going to be part of your own legacy forever, how do you both make that not a weakness but a strength? How do you make it that Orlando is not just about the horror that happened at Pulse, but yet it always is too, and so that you broaden that story?
But you know what? It's that same conversation. It's not about the horror that happened at Pulse. It's about how our community responded with love and compassion.
Tell people what they did with One Orlando.
So the very first day, on Monday, Disney and Universal both gave $1 million, and over the course of about 90 days, the community responded with $30 million that we were able to distribute to the victims and their families. And I'm very proud to say we're only about 4 months out, and we have distributed all of the funds from that. We met the immediate needs, and now we've met the long-term needs of a lot of the victims and the families, and there are about 299 total claims. And we went and got experts that helped us figure out how to do that as well.
And do you find that the community has bounced back? That it is, part of it is the day after question, which is how do you, after something like this, do you see people still willing to move in, still willing to go to Disneyland, still willing to be part of the Orlando business community?
I don't think anybody is hesitant to visit Orlando or move to Orlando because of this isolated event. But, I'd like to thank everybody out there, because part of the resilience and the reason we were able to bounce back was the love that came from all over the country and all over the world. I had a chance to speak at U.S. Conference of Mayors a couple weeks after Pulse, and just about every mayor came up with a screenshot of their city hall in rainbow colors or an architectural feature. We saw the London Bridge, we saw the Sydney Bridge, we saw the Eiffel Tower lit up. So we just felt that love and support from all over the world.
Now, I know you're up in Washington, D.C. tomorrow at the New America Foundation, or New America as it calls itself now, talking about social media and terrorism. What are you going to share?
They were going to do some research on how communication is done in crisis, and the premise was the social media would overtake the mainstream press. In our case, it actually didn't, because the event happened in the middle of the night, so the press had it before social media means had it. But also, part and parcel is how we communicated on social media, and that was part of our training from before. We had multiple agencies working on this, but we wanted one common message, so the OPD Twitter feed was that one message, and everybody else retweeted. We used the same messaging that I used at the press conferences in all the tweets, so we were getting out just one singular message, or the same unified message, I guess.
I was really intrigued in how you looked at the ecosystem of media around this, particularly when you look back, because you told me you were in the middle of things, so you weren't watching TV, you weren't watching the things that were going on there. And of course, those of us in national media were already running with the name of the alleged killer and issues about his life and wife and all of that. But yet, you were just sharing with me the local media was in a different track. And just give us a quick picture of that media terrain from your view.
If you could picture Orange Avenue in downtown Orlando with literally hundreds of media outlets from all over the world. So you had everybody from Anderson Cooper to the local weather guy were all out there. And the national news media were getting more information out of Washington related to the things you just addressed. So our local media focused more on the community and let the national media run with the bigger terrorism story. From my side, or my point of view, I've never mentioned the guy's name once, and I didn't care who he was and where he came from.
You told me this yesterday. I asked you what was the deal with Omar Mateen. You said,
he's there to me. It's all about healing our community at this point. So we never once focused on all the peripheral stuff about whether he was gay or whether he was a terrorist or what he was. We focused on our community, and our community responded. We had 50,000 people out for a vigil the next Sunday night. So, so supportive. When we asked for blood, we had people stand in line 3 or 4 hours to give blood.
It's sad to think that we're likely to have something like this happen again in the United States. I mean, I don't want to predict that, but you sort of feel like you're doing. And San Bernardino went through some similar kinds of issues. But when you look forward and you want to take the frame, are there, beyond just the emergency planning and the different dimensions, I'm sort of interested in a kind of a toolkit for what the mayor does and doesn't do. And if you were to give 2 or 3 quick hits of what the mayor doesn't do in a situation like that, what would they be?
Well, one thing is a lot of what you do beforehand. So I have the benefit of having been the mayor for 14 years, so I've been visiting mosques, and I've been in the gay community, I've been in the African American community. So everybody has my cell number. My staff jokes about just about everybody in Orlando has your cell number. I don't answer it, by the way, unless your name is programmed in. But
do you want to give everybody your cell number now?
Yeah. Creating those relationships that you can't create on the fly in the middle of a crisis is important to have those relationships before you start. And then I would say the other thing is having a staff that knows that you have their back, that is free to operate. So our little mantra in City Hall is, I think that 95% of the time a city employee that can make a decision would make the same one I do. And the other 5%, I got your back, whatever decision you made. So that allows them to operate and do their jobs without worrying about being second guessed.
And just finally, I know that you've been interested in, and you've talked about possibly making the Pulse nightclub some sort of memorial at some point, or some sort of teaching facility. Any hope of that happening?
So right now what we have done is we have set it up, fenced it off so that you can see into the Pulse nightclub, but there's an area where you can come pay tribute. We've taken down the temporary memorials, which were at the Performing Arts Center and at Lake Eola, and we're going to leave Pulse as it is for 12 to 18 months so that every day I go out there, there's people from who knows where, Australia, Iowa. So we're going to leave it so people that want to visit can visit, and that will give us a year or so to figure out exactly the best way to go about creating a memorial.
Ladies and gentlemen, Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer.
Thank you.